one of Watch Dogs. Legion's most talked about feature since launch is its permadeath system, a mechanic that turns the game from a lean-back open-world hacker adventure into something that carries real stakes and consequences if you choose it. In a game built around recruiting virtually any NPC in London and switching between operatives at will, permadeath injects a surprising layer of tension. But it's also one of the most debated elements in the community because it can drastically change how you feel about the world and the characters you bring into DedSec's fight. At its core, permadeath is an optional, hardcore mode you can enable at the start of a new campaign. If it's turned on, any operative who is killed by lethal damage or certain dramatic failures, falling from too high, getting blown up, etc., is gone forever from your roster. There's no resurrection, no hospital stay after a short cooldown. Once they die, that's it. That means if you've accumulated a beloved team of hackers, stealth experts, and specialists, and they all go down in one operation, the game can actually end in failure. What's interesting about Legion's implementation is that the developers didn't make this the default for everyone. In the game's original design, permadeath was going to be the standard experience, meaning everyone you recruited stayed at real risk. But after design challenges and community feedback during development, Ubisoft made it a toggleable option you can choose or decline before you begin playing. That way, players who just want to enjoy London, the story, and the freedom of the play-as-anyone system without constant fear of loss can turn it off, while players who want that extra emotional weight and survival feel can turn it on. If you play with permadeath on, the game becomes almost XCOM-like in how you treat each operative. You find yourself thinking carefully about every move, monitoring health closely, and sometimes making choices just to keep your squad alive, rather than rush headlong into an objective. Some players love this because it makes recruitment feel meaningful. Every recruit you bring into DedSec truly matters, and losing them hurts in a way that standard shooters or action games rarely make you feel. But there's also a built-in balance. Permadeath is only available in single player. Ubisoft specifically disabled it for the multiplayer modes. That's to prevent griefing or players trolling one another by getting team members killed arbitrarily online. In cooperative missions or competitive arenas, losing someone permanently would only cause frustration, so the mode is isolated to solo play, where decisions and consequences are entirely yours. Another important detail is how permadeath interacts with Legion's recruitment and roster systems. Even without permadeath, operatives can be out of action, they can be arrested or hospitalized if critically injured, but they aren't removed permanently. That's why even in the standard mode, you'll see operatives temporarily unavailable after a tough mission. With permadeath on, those familiar mechanics still exist, but instead of a temporary penalty, you face a permanent loss when a character dies. However, some operatives have unique traits that make them inherently dangerous. Traits like Death Wish or random spontaneous death. So in rare cases, even with permadeath off, you might see a character vanish unexpectedly due to their trait. The practical upshot of all this is that how you approach the game changes. If you love the idea of DedSec as a ragtag group of personalities you build relationships with, turning permadeath on can make missions gripping, because you're not just playing for objective success. You're playing to protect people you've created stories around. If you're more about exploration, hacking every corner of London, and enjoying a more forgiving sandbox, you can leave it off and never worry about restarting when someone dies. However, the system isn't without criticism, even years on. Some players have found that it adds tension in small doses, but in higher volumes it can feel punishing or inconsistent with the overall tone of the game. Missions that suddenly force open combat can sometimes make permadeath feel less about smart play and more about luck or unfair difficulty spikes. That's why many players prefer the flexibility of turning permadeath off, or using it selectively based on how they want their playthrough to feel. There's also the emotional question of attachment. In most RPGs or shooter campaigns with predefined protagonists, losing your main character would be unthinkable. But Legion's entire identity is built around the idea that anyone in London could be your next hero. The permadeath system plays into that philosophy, turning the entire city into a living roster where every citizen has potential and risk. When it works as intended, it amplifies your personal connection to London itself, not just the missions, because every corner encounter could add a Jeremy with a drone skill set, or Susan the street magician with surprising tech savvy, and either could be lost forever. In 2026, with players still revisiting Watch Dogs, Legion, thanks to its post-launch updates and expansions like Bloodline, Permadeath remains one of those systems people discuss passionately. It's both a hallmark of the game's ambition, trying to make a living, breathing resistance feel consequential, and a reminder that innovation sometimes comes with trade-offs. Whether it's a beloved feature or a polarizing challenge, Permadeath is absolutely integral to understanding Watch Dogs. Legion's unique design even years after its release, one of the subtle but profound effects of Permadeath in Watch Dogs, Legion is how it transforms player psychology. When Permadeath is active, players tend to treat each operative not just as a tool, but as a person with value. You start to weigh decisions far more carefully. Do you rush into a rooftop firefight knowing your hacker operative is vulnerable? Or do you send in a sturdier recruit? This risk assessment becomes almost instinctive after a few missions. Players report a tangible increase in tension and emotional engagement. Even mundane exploration feels charged because any interaction could result in permanent loss. That emotional weight is rare in open-world games, which normally encourage experimentation with minimal consequences. In essence, Permadeath converts a sandbox into a strategic chessboard, where every move can have irreversible repercussions. It also influences recruitment and specialization strategies. With Permadeath, you're more likely to diversify your roster deliberately. Having multiple operatives with overlapping abilities ensures that if one dies, you're not left incapable of completing missions. Players often create backup plans, keeping certain recruits in reserve for dangerous assignments. This approach mirrors real-world risk management, reinforcing the game's underlying theme of building a resilient resistance movement. It's an extra layer of planning that rewards foresight and experimentation, sometimes even more than direct combat skill.